games are better on PC. We have the most games, we have the best backwards compatibility, we have the best modding scene, and the best input scheme. Keyboard and mouse. Fight me. But the fact is, certain games are best enjoyed on a controller. Some games will outright tell you to use a controller. But unlike keyboards, the layout of a game controller is not standardized. Things are definitely a lot better now that there are 3 consoles using almost the exact same layout for their controllers, but these 4 face buttons will still be a pain point. I won't be going into the history of those differences, but there are better videos for that. I will explain how game developers can accommodate for these differences when they're designing their games. Ultimately, this is a problem of button prompts. Players need to know which button to reach for when they want to do a certain action. Games will often include hints like these, showing the relevant button near an interactable object. The implementation of button prompts are a topic of deep discussion. Here's a little anecdote. While I was playtesting Collect Call, I was surprised to learn just how many button prompts a game needs to have. I expected people to pick up on a control scheme quickly, and then be able to remember it. I split my playtesters into 2 groups, and each played a slightly different version of the game. One with what I thought was a normal amount of button prompts, and another group with a lot more. To my surprise, most of the first group said they wanted more button prompts, so I guess the correct number is more than the developer thinks they need. If you'd like to hear more about that whole process, put a comment in the description and I might turn it into another video. Okay, back on topic. Figuring out what kind of controller the player has is mostly a problem on PC. It's not like someone is going to try using a DualSense to play 1-2 switch. On PCs today, we can connect controllers meant for all 3 of the major consoles, and plenty of the older ones. This is in part because PCs have APIs like Xinput that work on a wide variety of controllers. Windows 10 and 11 use a slightly newer API called Game Input, and Linux has something similar. Regardless, inputs are usually reported to the game based on the Xbox layout. So that means that the top face button is Y, the right one is B, the bottom one is A, and the left one is X. Now, it might seem like the controllers should simply report the button presses based on how they're labeled, so users of Nintendo controllers just mirror their controls over this line. And then, A on a Nintendo controller becomes B on an Xbox, and X becomes Y. But we don't want to go by the labeling, we want to go by the physical placement of the button. See, if we go by the labeling, then your muscle memory breaks if you switch between controllers. And game designers pick their controls based on feel. Look at a cross-platform game on a console. They have different controls for each console. StrategyWiki.com has a few tables where we can see the controls across multiple platforms side by side. Minecraft's page seems like one of the more filled in ones, so let's look at that one. Regardless of platform, jump is always the bottom button. The top one opens inventory, left the crafting menu, and a right drops an item. So the API cannot report based on labeling, it needs to use the button location. But in that case, the game needs to know which controller layout is being used so that the correct prompts can be shown. And that's not always easy. Steam Input actually handles this problem very well. Steam maintains icons for many different types of controllers, and then it can identify the player's controller. The game simply asks Steam for the icon to a certain button and then shows it on screen. So the game can pretend that everyone uses an Xbox controller and then use whatever icons Steam provides. But not every game is on Steam, and not all games on Steam use Steam Input. As a matter of fact, my game on Steam doesn't use Steam Input. That's because I wrote my game in Java, and the library I used for Steam integration doesn't have Steam Input. So I can plug in a controller, and my game can detect it, so why can't my game just ask the controller what type it is? Actually, we can. Except that some controllers will identify themselves as X input controllers even if they actually use another input. In the case of my 8BitDo Ultimate controller, it will call itself a Switch Pro controller or an X input controller depending on how it's set up. That means if the user has connected this controller in X input mode, my game cannot tell the difference between this and an Xbox controller. To be clear, I don't think this is the fault of the libgdx library I was using. I think this is just down to there not being a standard way to ask a controller how its buttons are labeled. In Collect Call, my game, I ultimately decided to check the controller name when it got plugged in and see if it happened to contain the word Nintendo. If it did, then my game would make button prompts correct for a Switch controller. Otherwise, I just assumed it was an Xbox controller and went on with my life. There is a better solution, arguably, but I didn't use it. See, my code can't always tell what kind of controller you have because, it's possible that a Nintendo-style controller will identify itself as an Xbox controller. So, there is someone who does know how the controller is labeled. It's the player. So I could just ask the player. Rather than taking the player straight to the game's menu, I could instead show a prompt to press a button on a controller. Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo controllers all have an X button. Okay, PlayStation calls it a cross button, but it's still an X shape. And that button is on a different spot across all 3 controllers. So I could ask you to press the X button when the game starts, and then the button you press tells me which kind of controller you have. There's a problem. Because sometimes people press the wrong button. And if they do, they'll be stuck with the wrong layout until they change the setting. See, the X button on PlayStation is the A and B buttons on Nintendo and Xbox. So the A button is a very common button for clearing a menu. And in some other games, you might even press the A button to pass the first prompt in the game. So someone might simply press it on instinct, not realizing that they're supposed to press the X button. And now my game thinks they have, a different controller. So I didn't use this method, and instead I stuck with the one I mentioned before, checking if the controller's name said Nintendo, and assuming it was an Xbox otherwise. If you play Collect Call on Steam, that's exactly the solution you'll see. While I've got your attention, I thought I should mention Collect Call is free, and it works on both Windows and Linux. If you like puzzle games, maybe you like games with Steam Workshop support, then maybe check it out and let me know what you think. It supports custom maps and that sort of thing, so yeah, check it out. One last thing before you go. This video marks this sort of relaunch of my channel. I've uploaded a total of 5 videos on the same day in the hopes that maybe one of them will do well in the algorithm. If you're interested, you can find the other 4 on my channel page. And if you have ideas for more videos, please leave a comment here or join my Discord. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.